Jack Torrance had always wanted to get away from it all. After years of serving in the Terran Space Corps, fighting in the great wars of humanity's expansion, he was tired. Tired of the noise, the crowds, the politics. So he had found a quiet, peaceful corner of the galaxy on Kepler 62F, a remote exoplanet that few bothered to visit. He had a small house on the edge of a forest, surrounded by tall, ancient trees and a wide, clear sky. The planet's inhabitants were peaceful, and the terrain was perfect for growing his food and fixing old technology. Jack had never been happier to be far away from the chaos of the galaxy. At 67, he wasn't the young soldier he once was, but he still had a strong back and a sharp mind. He had enough resources to last him a lifetime, and he was content living his days in solitude. He didn't need much more than his quiet life and his books, maybe the occasional visit from a trader or explorer who needed a place to rest. But Jack didn't mind the isolation. It was exactly what he wanted. One morning, as he worked on repairing an old water purifier outside his house, something unusual caught his eye. A figure emerged from the thick trees, walking with a strange grace. Jack squinted, wiping sweat from his forehead. The figure was tall, much taller than any human, and her body shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, almost glowing in the soft light of the morning sun. She moved silently, her skin an alien shade of blue, her features unfamiliar and delicate. At first, Jack thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe a hallucination. He had been working in the sun for hours, and the heat sometimes made him dizzy. But the figure came closer, and he could see her clearly now. She was real, and she was heading straight for him. He stood up, brushing his hands on his faded shirt, and walked toward her. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice gruff and wary. The alien woman stopped a few paces away from him, her large eyes studying him with an intensity that made Jack uncomfortable. She opened her mouth, and a series of soft sounds came out, a language he didn't understand. Jack's brow furrowed, but he didn't back away. He had lived long enough in this part of the galaxy to know that a lot of strange things could happen, and most of them were nothing to be afraid of. "I'm not sure what you're saying," he said slowly, "but if you're in trouble, I'll help." The woman looked at him curiously. She seemed to consider his words for a moment before taking a step forward. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she looked exhausted. She was dressed in a strange kind of robe, made of fabric that seemed to change colors depending on how the light hit it. It looked like something out of a dream Jack didn't have the time to figure out. She took another step, and then collapsed, falling to her knees in front of him. Jack didn't hesitate. He immediately dropped to his knees beside her, supporting her as she sank into his arms. "You okay?" Jack asked, his voice gentle despite his confusion. The woman blinked up at him, her pupils dilated, her breathing labored. She whispered something in her strange language again. And then, as though the effort was too much, her eyes closed, and she fell unconscious in his arms. Jack swore under his breath. He wasn't a doctor, but he could see she was in bad shape. He stood up, carefully lifting her in his arms, and carried her inside his house. There, he placed her on the couch and immediately went to grab some of the medical supplies he kept in the corner. He wasn't sure what kind of alien she was, but she needed help. After a few minutes, he managed to stabilize her condition. It wasn't easy. Her skin was warm, almost burning, and her breathing was erratic. He used what he could: basic first aid, some painkillers, and the emergency healing kits he had on hand. His mind raced as he worked. Was she a soldier? A traveler? An explorer from another planet? Whatever she was, Jack knew one thing: she couldn't have come all this way alone. There had to be a reason she was here, and she was in no state to explain it. As he finished treating her, Jack sat back in his old armchair, staring at her with concern. He didn't expect this. He'd been living in peace for years, and now suddenly, an alien woman was in his house, unconscious and injured. The quiet life he dreamed of was far from what it had been this morning. He'd always enjoyed helping people, but he hadn't signed up for this. A few hours passed. Jack continued with his usual chores around the house, keeping an eye on the woman, unsure if she'd wake up or not. He kept the doors locked, just in case. But deep down, he wasn't really afraid. He had dealt with dangerous situations before, and he knew how to handle himself. It was just, this was different. Later that evening, the woman stirred. Jack was in the kitchen, preparing some simple dinner when he heard her soft voice. He quickly turned around, his heart racing. "Are you human?" she asked weakly, her voice strained but clear. Jack frowned, walking toward her. "No," he said, "I'm not. But I'm not here to hurt you." She looked up at him, her eyes full of questions. But for now, Jack just let her rest. The answers could wait. Jack had never been a man who easily trusted others, especially not strangers who appeared on his doorstep in the middle of nowhere. But as he watched the alien woman rest on his couch, her condition slowly improving, he couldn't deny the feeling that something important was happening. Something that had nothing to do with the quiet life he had always dreamed of. It had been hours since he had carried her inside, and she had shown no signs of waking up. He kept an eye on her, checking on her health periodically. Her skin had cooled down, and her breathing had become steadier. The heat that had radiated from her was now gone, and Jack was beginning to think she might make it through. He sat in his old chair by the fireplace, his mind racing. "What do you want, lady?" he muttered to himself. "Why are you here?" The house was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire, and Jack found himself lost in thought. He wasn't expecting any kind of adventure in his retirement, but here it was, knocking on his door. He couldn't help but wonder who, or what, she was. Suddenly, a soft sound interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see the woman stirring, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked a few times, as if trying to adjust to the dim light of the room. Her eyes, large and dark, focused on him, and for a moment, there was a quiet connection between them. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse, but now more understandable. Jack raised an eyebrow. Her speech was clearer, more fluent than before. "You're in my home," Jack replied, crossing his arms. "You were injured. I helped you." She sat up slowly, her long, graceful limbs moving with a strange fluidity. She winced slightly, pressing her hand to her side, where Jack had patched up a wound. Jack noticed that her skin still had a faint glow to it, though not as strong as before. "My name is Sci-Fi," she said, her voice now more confident. "I thank you for helping me." Jack didn't know what to make of her. She was clearly from a different species. That much was obvious. Her skin, the way it shimmered with a soft light, her eyes, and even the way she moved. Everything about her was alien. But her words were human enough. And despite her unusual appearance, she seemed like she was trying to be polite. "No problem," Jack replied with a shrug. "Just doing what anyone would do." Savira looked around the small cabin, her eyes scanning the walls, the shelves of books, and the simple furnishings. "Your home is quiet," she said thoughtfully. "I like it." Jack chuckled softly. "That's the idea. No loud crowds, no fighting over anything. Just me and the trees. Not much more I need." She seemed to smile at that, though Jack wasn't entirely sure if it was a smile by her standards. Her lips twitched, and the corners of her eyes brightened slightly, giving her an expression of warmth. It was strange to see her like this, peaceful, almost serene, after the panic and confusion that had led to her arrival. "Why were you out there, in the forest?" Jack asked, curious. "You didn't exactly look like you were on a sightseeing tour." Savira hesitated before answering. She seemed to weigh her words carefully. I was being pursued. I needed to escape. My people. I am not from this planet." She looked away, as if gathering her thoughts. "I was traveling, and something went wrong. I don't know exactly what happened, but I ended up here. And then I met you." Jack frowned slightly. "Pursued? By who?" What's going on? She shook her head slowly, her glowing skin dimming slightly as she relaxed. I cannot explain everything right now, but I promise you, I mean you no harm. She paused, then added, I am not exactly like you. My kind are different. I must ask for your understanding as I navigate my own journey. Her cryptic words only made Jack more curious, but he didn't press further. She clearly wasn't ready to share everything, and he didn't want to push her too hard. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the stove. You must be hungry. I have some food. You should eat. You're not in any condition to be wandering around just yet. Savira looked at him, her expression softening. Thank you, she said simply. Jack quickly prepared a small meal. Nothing fancy, just some of the vegetables he grew himself and a bit of salted meat he had been drying. He set the food down on the table and watched as Savira carefully picked up the utensils, studying them for a moment before using them to eat. The way she ate was different. It wasn't clumsy, but it wasn't exactly like Jack had expected either. Her movements were precise, and she seemed to savor each bite, almost as though she was tasting it for the first time. Jack didn't mind. He wasn't exactly the world's best cook, but the food was filling, and it seemed to do the job. As the night wore on, they sat in silence. Jack didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to having anyone, let alone an alien, sitting across from him, sharing his space. He had lived for so long in solitude that the presence of someone else, someone so different, felt almost overwhelming. But Jack was nothing if not adaptable, and the feeling gradually faded as they spent more time together. By the time the fire was burning low, Savira was feeling much better. Her strength was returning, and the strange, glowing patterns on her skin were starting to pulse again, though not as intensely as before. You are kind, she said softly, her voice quiet. I will not forget this. Jack gave her a small, weary smile. It's nothing. I just did what anyone would do. But even as he said that, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this strange encounter, this alien woman, was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The next morning, Jack woke to the smell of fresh herbs and a soft, pleasant hum. The sun was barely rising, casting a golden glow over the small house. He rubbed his eyes and stretched before getting out of bed, feeling the aches of old age. But as he stepped into the main room, he froze. Savira was standing by the window, her body glowing faintly in the early light. She had arranged flowers on the windowsill, and strange vines were growing along the walls, vines that Jack was sure hadn't been there the night before. The vines seemed to pulse with a soft, rhythmic glow, almost like they were alive. Good morning, Savira said in a calm, melodic voice. She turned to face Jack, her eyes sparkling as if she had just discovered something wonderful. Jack blinked, rubbing his eyes again. What in the world are these? He pointed to the vines. Savira's expression brightened. They are a gift from my people, she explained. A symbol of connection. Jack raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant, but decided not to press her just yet. Look, I appreciate the effort, but I didn't ask for any of this, he said, motioning to the glowing vines and flowers. Savira lowered her gaze for a moment before responding. I know, but I thought you might like them. Jack was taken aback by the sincerity in her voice. Despite her alien appearance and strange customs, she seemed to genuinely want to make him happy. Jack sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. Well, I can't say it's exactly my style, but thanks, I guess. A small smile tugged at the corner of Savira's lips. I understand, she said. She paused for a moment before speaking again, her tone becoming more serious. There is something else I must tell you, Jack. Jack's brow furrowed. What is it? Savira took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. I am not here by accident. I came to this planet because I am in a time of change, a time when my people go through a cycle. She looked away, clearly uncomfortable. A cycle that my kind experiences, known as the mating season. Jack blinked, a frown forming on his face. Mating season, he repeated, not quite understanding what she was saying. Yes, Savira continued, it is a natural process for my species. During this time, we seek to bond with another, to connect in a way that goes beyond just physical. It is a deep, instinctual need. Jack felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't expected this. He'd been helping an alien woman, not thinking anything more of it. But now, as the words sank in, he realized that he might have gotten himself caught up in something far beyond his control. Savira met his gaze, her eyes full of honesty and a touch of vulnerability. I understand that this is confusing, Jack. I did not plan this. I did not mean to involve you in my people's cycle. But she hesitated, then said softly, but I cannot control it. My body is already responding to you. Jack took a step back, his mind racing. Wait, hold on a minute. He raised both hands, trying to process the words she had just spoken. So, you're telling me that you're here because of some kind of mating instinct. And you're reacting to me. Yes, Savira admitted, her tone apologetic. I am. But it is not just physical. It is more than that. My species does not bond with just anyone. There must be something special, something unique about the connection between us. Jack felt a mix of confusion and disbelief. But I don't know you. You're an alien. I'm just an old guy living out here in the woods. This doesn't make any sense. Savira nodded, as though she understood his frustration. I know. This is not how I would have chosen it. But the cycle does not always follow reason. It follows instinct. She paused, giving Jack time to process. And my instinct tells me that you are the one I must bond with. Jack shook his head, his mind struggling to keep up with her words. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered, running a hand over his face. He had just wanted peace, not a tangled mess of alien mating cycles. For a moment, Savira said nothing. She simply stood there, watching him carefully, as if waiting for his response. Jack took a deep breath, trying to collect his thoughts. He wasn't the kind of person who would back down from a challenge. But this was different. He had no idea what he was dealing with. I'm not. Jack started, but Savira interrupted him. I do not ask for your agreement, Jack. I only ask for your understanding. If you do not wish to be part of this, I will leave. I will find another way. But if you are willing to accept me, even just as a friend, I will not force you. Her voice was calm, almost pleading, and Jack could see the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't trying to manipulate him, wasn't trying to force him into anything. She was just caught in the middle of something she couldn't control. Jack took a long breath and looked out the window, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his independence. He had lived alone for so many years, and he didn't need anyone else. But now, here she was, an alien woman with an entirely different set of rules. And somehow, she had entered his world. Whether he liked it or not, he was tangled in her strange cycle. I don't know what to do with all this, Jack muttered to himself. But before he could say more, Savira spoke again, her voice full of warmth. You don't have to know, Jack. You just have to be here. Jack looked at her, still uncertain, but for the first time since meeting her, he felt a little less alone. For the next few days, Jack kept his distance from Savira, trying to figure out what to make of the situation. He wasn't sure if he could handle the idea of becoming part of something so alien, something that went beyond anything he had ever experienced. Every time he thought about it, his mind would spiral into confusion and doubt. He didn't want to hurt her, but at the same time, he didn't want to get caught up in something he didn't understand. Meanwhile, Savira seemed to settle into the routine of his home. She helped with the small tasks around the cabin, even finding ways to improve things. The glowing vines she had brought with her had spread along the walls, filling the house with a soft, warm light at night. Jack had to admit, it was beautiful, even if it was a little too strange for his taste. but there was something about her presence, something calming, that made him feel less lonely. One morning, as Jack was out in the garden, tending to his plants, Savira came outside with a basket of herbs she had gathered. She approached him slowly, her expression unreadable. "Jack," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I know you are confused, and I do not want to push you. But I need to ask, are you afraid of me?" Jack paused, looking up at her, his weathered hands resting on the edge of a tomato plant. He wasn't sure how to answer that. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like uncertainty, a deep sense of not knowing how to handle everything that had happened in such a short time. But fear, that wasn't it. "I'm not afraid of you," Jack said slowly, wiping his hands on his shirt. I don't know what to do with all of this. This isn't what I expected when I decided to retire out here." Savira nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know. This was not what I expected either. But I cannot control what my body is telling me. The cycle is powerful. And right now, it tells me that you are the one who can help me through it." Jack exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just an old man, Savira. I don't know what I can offer you." Savira stepped closer, the basket still in her hands. "You have already offered me something, Jack. Something more than you realize. Peace. I have never felt at ease in my life. But here, with you, I feel safe." Jack looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had never been a man of many emotions, but her honesty made something stir inside him. He hadn't had anyone truly care about him in a long time. Not like this. Not in a way that made him question everything he had known. "Safe," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she replied quietly. "You are kind, and you are strong in a way that no one else is. You don't need to say anything more." For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, the only sound the gentle rustling of the trees around them. Jack felt a strange tension in the air, a feeling that he couldn't shake. He wasn't sure if it was the pressure of Savira's emotions, or if it was something deeper, something connected to the very nature of her species. But he could feel it, like a current running between them. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep my distance," Jack finally said, his voice low and unsure. "This thing, whatever it is between us, is too strong for me to ignore forever." Savira looked at him, her eyes bright with something he couldn't quite place. "You don't have to keep your distance, Jack. I don't want to force anything on you, but I can't help the way I feel. And if you are willing, I would like to share this journey with you." Jack's chest tightened. He had never been good at talking about feelings, especially not his own. He had always kept to himself, lived a quiet life, away from the complications of others. But something about Savira's presence made him want to understand her, to figure out what she really needed. "I don't know how to do that," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to help you through this cycle, or whatever it is. But I'll try, if you really think it's what you need." Savira's face softened, and for the first time, Jack saw something in her eyes that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. "That is all I ask, Jack. I only need your understanding, your companionship. I do not expect you to be everything I need. But if you are willing to walk this path with me, I would be grateful." The weight of her words settled on Jack's shoulders, and he realized that he wasn't sure if he could handle the full extent of what Savira was asking of him. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just turn his back on her. Not after everything she had shared with him. Not after the trust she had placed in him. "I can't promise anything," Jack said finally, his voice steady. "But I'll try. I'll be here. Whatever you need." A soft, warm smile spread across Savira's face, and Jack felt something in his chest loosen. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch light, but reassuring. "That is all I need," she said softly. "Thank you." As the days passed, Jack found himself slowly opening up to the idea of sharing his life with Savira, even if it was just for this brief moment in time. He wasn't sure where this strange connection would take them, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone in the universe. And for Severa, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Jack slowly adjusted to the strange presence of Severa in his life. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, her alien nature still an enigma, but her kindness and honesty made it easier to ignore the differences. She became a constant in his life, helping him with his daily tasks, sharing meals, and talking to him about things that made little sense at first, but gradually began to form a picture of who she was. Jack had always been a quiet man, content with his solitude, but now, with Severa around, the silence seemed less heavy. She didn't speak much about her past, and Jack didn't press her. There was always an air of mystery around her, something that made him curious but also hesitant. He could tell there were things she was not telling him, things she could not explain. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin, Severa asked him to accompany her outside. Jack followed her, unsure of what to expect. She had been acting a little different over the past few days, more withdrawn, and Jack had noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. Her glowing skin had become brighter at times, and there was a tension in the air that he couldn't ignore. "Where are we going?" Jack asked as they walked through the woods behind the cabin. "You will see," Severa replied quietly, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "There is something I must show you. It is important." They reached a clearing deep in the forest, an area Jack had never explored before. The place felt different, almost otherworldly, with an ethereal quality to the air. The trees here were taller, their trunks twisted in strange, unnatural shapes. The ground beneath their feet was soft and covered in bright moss that glowed faintly under the fading sunlight. Jack couldn't help but look around, feeling a slight unease. "What is this place?" Severa paused and turned to face him. "This is a sacred place for my people," she explained. "It is where we begin the cycle." Jack's confusion deepened. "The cycle?" Severa nodded, her face serious. "The cycle of our kind. The mating season is not just about finding a bond. It is also a way to connect with the planet itself, to draw power from the land and the universe. My people believe that this connection is necessary for the process to be complete. Without it, the bond cannot be formed." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "So, you're telling me this is some kind of ritual?" "Yes," Severa said softly. "But it is not just a ritual. It is a bond of energy, one that must be shared between the land, the sky, and the beings involved. It is a deep, sacred connection that my people have followed for centuries." Jack felt his chest tighten. He had always thought of himself as someone who lived in the real world, not in a world of rituals and mysteries. But now, standing in the clearing, he realized that Severa's people didn't see the world the way he did. Their connection to the planet, their beliefs, were something far beyond his understanding. And yet, here he was, caught in the middle of it. "What do you need me for?" Jack asked, his voice quiet but steady. "You're saying I'm part of this cycle? I don't understand." Severa stepped closer, her eyes softening. "It is not about what you need to do. It is about what we can do together. You are the one I have been drawn to. I feel it in my soul, in the deepest part of my being. I cannot explain it any more clearly, but I know that you are the one who can help me complete this connection." Jack took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it all. "But I'm just a guy. I don't know anything about your people's rituals. I don't even know how to help you." "You already have," Severa said with a smile, a soft, gentle smile that warmed Jack's heart. "By simply being here, you have already helped me. You've given me peace, Jack. That is enough." Jack stood there for a long moment, looking at her, trying to grasp the enormity of what she was asking of him. He had lived so long alone, and now he was being asked to play a role in something so far outside of his experience. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the truth of her words. She was not asking for him to be someone he wasn't. She was simply asking him to be there. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Jack said quietly, "but I'm here. I'll stay with you." Savira nodded, her face lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. That is all I need." As the evening sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Savira knelt in the center of the clearing, her hands outstretched toward the sky. Jack watched her closely, still unsure of what was happening, but willing to stay and witness whatever it was that she believed was so important. The air around them seemed to grow still, the usual sounds of the forest fading away as though the world itself was holding its breath. Savira closed her eyes, and Jack felt a strange pull in the air, a warmth that spread from the ground beneath them. He watched as her skin began to glow brighter, the vines that had once been confined to the walls of the cabin now slowly creeping toward the clearing, as if drawn by some unseen force. Jack's heart raced as he realized that something was happening, something he didn't fully understand, but could not deny. The land, the air, and Savira herself were all connected in ways he couldn't explain. And in that moment, Jack knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same again. The night sky above the clearing had turned into a vast, glittering ocean of stars, and Jack stood quietly by Savira, watching as the energy around her seemed to intensify. Her glowing skin brightened, and the vines that had slowly crept toward the clearing now seemed to pulse with life. The entire clearing was alive with an otherworldly energy that Jack could feel deep in his bones. It was a hum, a vibration in the air that made his heart race and his mind spin. Savira's eyes were closed, her face peaceful, as though she was completely immersed in whatever process was taking place. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether he should interrupt her or let things unfold. He had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't deny the power that was building around them. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. After what seemed like hours, Savira opened her eyes slowly, and Jack saw something new in them. There was an intensity there, a depth of emotion that made him pause. It was as if the ritual, or whatever it was she was doing, had unlocked something inside her. "Jack," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is beginning. The connection is forming, and I can feel it." Jack took a step closer, his eyes never leaving her. "What connection? What's happening?" Savira turned toward him, her expression serious but calm. "The bond, Jack. It is starting to take shape. We are becoming part of something greater than ourselves. The energy from the land is merging with mine, and it is reaching for you." Jack frowned, trying to process what she was saying. "And what do you want me to do?" "I'm not sure what you're asking from me." "I do not want anything from you, Jack," she said, reaching out to touch his arm gently. "I simply need you to remain here, to allow the energy to flow between us. It is not something you can control. It is something that must happen on its own." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He felt a strange warmth spreading through him as Savira's hand made contact with his skin. It was like electricity running through his veins, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The sensation was both calming and overwhelming, and he knew that he could not pull away even if he wanted to. He didn't want to. There was something about the bond she spoke of that felt natural, almost like it had always been meant to happen. Savira's eyes held his, and Jack could see the trust in them, the kind of trust that only came when two beings were connected on a level beyond words. "You do not have to understand it all, Jack," Savira continued. "Just trust that this is right. Trust that we are meant to be here, together, at this moment. The universe has brought us together for a reason, and though we may not fully understand it, we are part of something larger than ourselves." Jack nodded slowly, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. But as he stood there, his hand resting on hers, he felt something shift inside him. It was as if the universe was speaking directly to him, guiding him through a process that he could not fully comprehend. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, he knew that this connection, whatever it was was something worth embracing. Suddenly, the air around them seemed to shimmer as if it was vibrating with energy. The vines, which had once been a simple decoration in his cabin, now seemed to stretch toward them, wrapping around their feet like living tendrils. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the energy rise around him. It was as if the earth itself was joining in the ritual, connecting with them in ways he could not explain. "This is it, Jack," Severa said, her voice filled with awe. "The cycle is complete. The bond is formed." Jack's eyes widened as he felt a wave of warmth rush through him, radiating out from the spot where his hand touched Severa's. It was more than just a physical sensation. It was as if their very souls were intertwined, drawing power from the land and the universe around them. In that moment, Jack realized that Severa's people did not simply seek to bond physically. They sought a union that transcended the body, a connection that linked their hearts, their minds, and their very beings. And though he had once thought of himself as an old, solitary man, here he was, part of something far greater than himself. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, connected by an invisible thread that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the universe itself. The stars above them glowed brighter, as though acknowledging the bond that had been formed. The entire world felt still, as if waiting for something. Finally, Severa broke the silence. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You have given me something I cannot put into words." Jack looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of wonder and confusion. "I don't know what just happened," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I think I understand a little more now. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'll be here. I'll stay with you." Severa smiled, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "That is all I could ever ask for, Jack." And in that moment, surrounded by the power of the land, the stars, and their shared connection, Jack knew that he had made the right choice. He had given up his solitude for something far more meaningful, something that would change both of their lives forever. The days following the connection between Jack and Severa passed in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. It was as if time itself had slowed down, allowing them to enjoy the bond they had formed without rushing. Jack had never known peace like this before. Even though their lives were so different, they had found a way to coexist, each day deepening their connection, their understanding of one another. For Jack, the most surprising part was how natural it all felt. The sense of unity between him and Severa was undeniable, and it brought a strange sense of calm to his heart. It wasn't something he had ever expected in his life, let alone in his twilight years. He had always been content with his solitude, but now, with Severa beside him, he realized that solitude had never truly been enough. What he had felt before was a hollow peace, but now he felt complete. Severa, too, seemed to settle into her new life with Jack. She had not shared much about her past before their bond, but now, with the bond complete, she began to speak more about her people, her world, and the long journey that had brought her here. She spoke of her home planet, of the stars that had guided her, and the rituals that had shaped her. And Jack listened, his heart and mind open, absorbing everything she shared. One evening, as they sat outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Severa spoke again. "Jack," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I have been thinking a lot lately." Jack turned to look at her, his brow furrowed slightly. "What about?" "About what comes next," she said quietly. "I know I have found a new life here, but I also know that I cannot stay in this place forever. My people will need me eventually." Jack's heart sank at the thought of losing her. He had grown so used to her presence, her calm energy, that the idea of her leaving was almost unthinkable. But he didn't want to hold her back either. He had seen how important her people and her journey were to her. "I understand," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know you can't stay here forever, but I'm glad you're here now. Whatever happens, I don't regret a single moment." Severa turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You are a good man, Jack. I never expected to find someone like you." someone who would accept me, even when you didn't understand what I was. But you have given me more than I could have ever hoped for." Jack smiled gently, reaching over to take her hand. "You've given me more than I could have ever expected to. I didn't know what I was missing until you showed up." Savira's smile was small but full of warmth. "It is strange, isn't it, how the universe works? I came here not knowing what I was looking for, and yet, somehow, I found it. I found you." Jack chuckled softly. "I guess that's the way it goes sometimes. Life's full of surprises." As the evening wore on, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the occasional rustle of the trees and the distant call of birds. The air was cool, but the warmth of their shared connection kept them both at ease. The next few days passed in a blur. Jack and Savira spent their time enjoying each other's company, working together to improve the cabin and exploring the surrounding wilderness. Savira seemed to be learning more about Jack with each passing day, and Jack, in turn, learned more about her. Her people's customs were strange to him, but the more she explained, the more he began to see the beauty in her world. They were very different, but in their differences, they had found something extraordinary. However, as much as Jack had grown attached to Savira, he knew that the day was coming when she would have to leave. Her journey, her purpose, lay elsewhere, and Jack could not stand in the way of that. It was a bitter thought, but it was the truth. One afternoon, as they were walking through the forest, Jack stopped and looked at Savira, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. "Savira," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know you have to go, but I want you to know that I will always remember you. What we shared, it was real. I'll never forget it." Savira turned to face him, her expression soft but sad. "I will always carry you with me, Jack. You will never be forgotten. What we have is not just a moment. It is a bond that will last, no matter where I go." Jack nodded, though his heart ached at the thought of losing her. He had never thought he would form such a deep bond with someone, especially not with someone so different from him. But Savira had shown him that connection didn't have to be defined by appearances, by species, or even by the understanding of the world around them. It was a feeling, a shared moment, and that was enough. As the days grew shorter and the air cooler, the time for Savira's departure came. Jack stood at the edge of the forest, watching her prepare to leave. The vines that had once wrapped around the cabin now seemed to retreat, as if they, too, understood that her journey had reached its end. "I'll miss you," Jack said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Savira smiled one last time, her eyes bright with gratitude and sadness. "And I will miss you, Jack. But remember, this isn't the end. Our bond will remain. And wherever the stars take me, I'll carry you in my heart." With that, Savira turned, walking toward the ship that had brought her here, leaving Jack standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her go. As she disappeared into the distance, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. She had come into his life when he needed it the most, and though their time together had been brief, it had been a gift, a reminder that even in the most unexpected of places, connection could be found. And so, as the stars twinkled above, Jack knew that he had been part of something extraordinary. The universe had a way of bringing people together, no matter how unlikely the connection might seem. And sometimes, that connection was all you needed to change your life forever.